wanted to say that just remember this is a great opportunity to try things out because you're in a totally safe space and it's very supportive and it's a good stepping stone between here and kind of the world out there. um, to try those skills of, say, like giving presentations, talking to a larger group. So, and we all really believe in you, and you're such a great speaker. But once you were like put on the spot and you're being asked to do it, then it feels very different than just contributing. But you speak really well. You're very articulate. And if this is a way to build your confidence in your skills, then just give it a shot.
Mm, you,
Okay,
you make a lot of sense, Liz. Make a lot of sense.
It's
It's
just
just the
it's a lot of experience, and I can suss out strength in people. I can sniff it out, even remotely.
Thank you.
well, I mean, it's open to other people as well. So hopefully other people will get involved too. Okay, we're going to start the presentation now. So I'm going to share the screen, if that's okay with everybody. And Liz, I've made you co-host, and Martha, I've made you co-host. So if you could just keep an eye on admitting people, because I suspect we'll get some late comers. Thank you, Marcia. Okay. Can everybody see that presentation there? Great stuff. And you can hear me okay then? Good, thank you very much. All right, this is our 17th session. It feels like a long time since, I think it was July we started. But as you can see, it's on emotional intelligence, and we're going to be discussing this in depth over the next 2 weeks. And hopefully we'll approach this in a very emotionally intelligent way, in that we're going to include people as part of this process so that we can get those relationship dynamics going, which have been building up so well over the past few sessions, particularly the last 2 sessions with Marcia and Liz. So you can see it's a contribution from Liz and Simon, and we're very pleased to have Simon with us, talking about his own pathway through emotional intelligence to explore the notion of executive functions. So that will be fascinating. I'm going to do it in 3 parts. The first part, I'm going to be talking about the context of emotional intelligence. I'm going to actually say EI all the time now. We've got somebody who needs to be admitted. I'm going to be talking about it in the context of a neurodivergent person. My position on this, and you can debate this with me, you can argue the point with me, or you can agree with me, I don't mind. My position on this is that neurodivergent people have a tendency to be quite high on emotional intelligence. And I will reveal the reasons for that as we go through this session. The second part will be looking at the EI economic benefit of neurodivergent people in our society. So again, it's proving the point that neurodivergent people have got high emotional intelligence, and actually others around them need to have a high emotional intelligence in order to accept the skills and attributes of neurodivergent people and their contributions in society. And there'll be some facts that support that in terms of research. The third part will be next week, and it'll be you really bringing to us some of your experiences in your lives, in the workplace, in education, around what you think has been an emotional intelligence of others or yourself. And there are competencies that we have that allow us to understand emotional intelligence a little bit more. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. Right, part 1. What is emotional intelligence? It's the ability to identify and assess one's emotions, the emotions of others and that of groups. The point about this, if you have the ability to do that, you actually have to know yourself and be self-aware of who you are. We're going to get onto that in a minute. Got somebody else who needs to be admitted. The person who conceived of the idea of emotional intelligence is a man called Daniel Goleman. He's still alive today, still alive and kicking, and he is based in Chicago. He's a professor, I believe, and he's a psychologist and a science journalist. Daniel Goleman has been incredibly influential in the world of business, particularly as from the 90s up to now, particularly with blue chip companies in the world of business who've understood that to have emotional intelligence is really, really important to their business and positive business and bringing people with them. Daniel Goleman came along after Howard Gardner. I don't know whether anybody knows about Howard Gardner, but he came along in the 80s, late 70s and 80s, and he has produced several books on multiple intelligences. His first book, Frames of Mind, came out in 1983. And what he said was that the way people are assessed and tested for intelligence or ability to intellectually think or conceptualize is very, very narrow up to that point. This IQ testing is a one fit for all. It doesn't work. And that actually human beings are complex creatures and we have multiple intelligences. And he came up with this concept of 8 intelligences, which include things like spatial and visual intelligence, linguistic intelligence, kinesthetic intelligence, and intelligence around the understanding of who we are and evolution. Let me think. Interpersonal and intrapersonal intelligences. That's the ability to understand who you are interpersonally and the ability to understand what's going around you in your outer environment. I think that was the main ones, yes. And logical, which is to do with maths. And he came up with these intelligences. There's somebody who needs to be admitted. Okay. And he was incredibly influential during this time, particularly in education. He informed, particularly in the US and in the UK, educational practices and the understanding about differentiated learning, that we all learn differently. And in some teaching practices, obviously taken this up very, very well. In other areas, it hasn't. In response to this, this very influential thinking from Howard Gardner, Daniel Goleman came along and wrote Emotional Intelligence in 1995. And he said, actually, you've missed something out. You've missed out that there is an emotional intelligence, that people have an intelligence which is about managing their emotions, about being self-regulated, about being socially aware, having self-awareness, being aware of cause and effect of their actions on others, having a moral compass, being able to self-manage themselves in order to have that moral compass, and in turn to be able to relationship manage. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So what does emotional intelligence allow you to do? It allows you to understand and manage your emotions in order to create positive social interactions. And this is what Daniel Goleman is going on about all the time. It is absolutely pointless to have negative social interactions for business and in anything that we do. You know, bad leaders are leaders who do not bring other people with them or understand the philosophy or the vision that they have to bring and to enable people to come with them. And you don't do this by negative social interactions. You do this by being positive and having empathy and regulating your own emotions. What we can all remember is in the age of austerity before 2010, 2007 onwards, there actually were many examples of bad managers who had been brought in specifically to downsize and do hatchet jobs on people. They didn't bring people with them. They certainly didn't demonstrate emotional intelligence, but they'd be brought on to do a job. Up to that point, there had been an understanding about emotional intelligence among some leaders, but when we went through austerity, we certainly didn't see much emotional intelligence at that time. We are starting to find that leaders are becoming better at having those conversations and consultations and enabling people to be flexible and having discussions and contributing to the business. So first of all, it is about knowing who you are. And my premise here is that actually as neurodivergent people, we don't know who we are unless we know what our neurodivergence is. Because our neurodivergence is very much part of us. It is part of who we are, it's part of how we think, and it's part of how we behave. So knowing who you are and having that diagnosis is deeply important to people, and it should be. And it should be a positive. Although for many, many years, because of the medical model, it hasn't been positive. Hopefully, we're having a light at the end of the tunnel, and people are beginning to, society is beginning to recognize the skills and attributes of neurodivergent people. My position is this, and it is from 10 years, I suppose, of doing research, which was researching into the socio-economic and cultural thinking and position of neurodivergent people. And from what I researched, I found that a very high percentage of neurodivergent and dyslexic people spent their time positioning themselves as outsiders. And they did that because they needed to understand the dynamics of what was going on around them in order to actually, if they decided to be part of that dynamics. They couldn't just be part of that dynamics straight off. They had to have intense scrutiny of others and their own behavior in order to understand those dynamics. Does that resonate with anybody? You can just put your thumbs up. Okay, we've got one person putting their thumbs up. Right. The visual there in front of you shows that often we mask what we do as the tip of the iceberg, and underneath in that water, there is real deep meaning going on, where we try to make sense of what is happening around us. So, the dyslexic cognitive culture is positioned within the dynamic of the outsider. And the point I am making, the whole reason for many of us feeling outsiders is because systems are not conducive to the way we think. They are in the main linear. They are not multidimensional or multilateral. However, there are many, many sectors of industry in this world that embrace multilateral, multidimensional thinking, such as technology. And it is no surprise that there are many dyslexic neurodivergent people who congregate in the sectors of industry around technology, because there has to be that multi-layered thinking to make links and to make concepts and to be able to problem solve. Over to you, Liz.
Sorry, Catherine, should we deal with Anne's question? I think she's posted something interesting. Anne, do you want to raise your question?
Hi, yeah, sorry. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thinking just is being open to receive others' emotions part of our own emotional intelligence? Because I find I sort of a bit like a sponge with other people's emotions, taking on board their issues and their problems and how they're feeling. And it can be quite exhausting to have that mixed up with all my own stuff going on. And I'm mainly relating it to our own 15-year-old son, who was diagnosed a couple of years back with ASD PDA and is a school refuser. And I've said that I'm sure any parent would take that on board, his emotions, but I'm just wondering, as a dyslexic, is it heightened in any way?
I think it often is. And I think this is my point about emotional intelligence being at quite a high level for dyslexic neurodivergent people. I think it is particularly heightened because I think often we're not only empathetic to ourselves, but because of that, we're empathetic to other people's needs. And you can only be empathetic if you are aware, if you're self-aware and you're aware of others. And we have talked in past sessions, and particularly with Ross, about the ability for dyslexic people, particularly, to be visually aware, to be looking at those visual signals when we are actually in conversation with other people, because visual language is the fastest language. That allows us to be empathetic, even more empathetic, if we have such heightened visual awareness, because we're looking at body language cues all the time. And body language is incredibly important to understanding how people are feeling. So yeah, and I can understand what you're talking about there. It's Anne, isn't it? Because you know, I find that myself, that often you become a sponge and it can be quite exhausting, but I would prefer that and to be empathetic to others' needs, and to
Absolutely, Catherine.
And to be able to relate that to my own emotions and to make sense of it as a human being, than not do it, you know. I think that many dyslexic neurodivergent people in business do actually make excellent leaders. And I know that I'm sounding very biased, but I do think they do, because of this ability to be empathetic, because they wish to take people with them. And they tend to work much more effectively in teams. Obviously leading teams, but being part of a team and recognizing teams rather than being autocratic leaders. It's very rare to find a dyslexic person, particularly, being an autocratic leader, which by that I mean very authoritarian. You will actually take my instructions and you will abide by my instructions, and there will be no discussion over it whatsoever. Because of where we come from, and because we have to navigate so many different strategies and ways of behaving, I think that there is a tendency for us to recognize the need for flexibility and the need for us to be able to be flexible in our understanding of others as well. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Is there any other questions at all?
I was just thinking there, Catherine, though. I mean, you're right. I think, you know, empathy is really important, but just that thing about being a sponge, part of emotional intelligence also, isn't it about recognizing when you actually have to put down the gates because, you know, because you can't take any more? And I actually know you're quite good at that. You know, you will, when things have gone too far, you say, no, that's enough. You know, I mean, you wouldn't say it to the person who's draining you, but, you know, you would recognize that you have to stop. So part of emotional intelligence surely is to also, you know, recognize your, you know, there are times when you can't be a sponge, you know, that you've sponged up enough, so to speak.
No, I quite agree with you. That's absolutely right, and that's where there's this other aspect of emotional intelligence which Daniel Goleman talks about, which is self-regulation, your ability to regulate your emotions, and your ability to regulate them so that you not only look after yourself, but you look after others too, who are around you. So a good leader will who has good self-regulatory systems in place for their emotions will never just fire off or lose their temper just like that. They will consider what needs to be done first. They might take themselves away in a private space in order to manage their emotions, and then they would come back to deal with what needs to be dealt with in the best conducive way possible for everybody.
I disagree.
You're very welcome to disagree, Adrian.
Because you see, it all depends upon the situation. There are times when a row is needed because there's no alternative, and you know, just bang, just to get something done. And you know, it's a question. No, it's a question. No, but if you do that quite, no, hang on, let me finish, please. You can do that quite deliberately. It's perfectly acceptable. I had a situation like that today. I got what I wanted. That's it. I have no regrets.
Well, I don't agree with you. I actually don't think it's conducive to lose your emotion or your temper without thinking about it first, because it has a ripple effect on people, and it actually is more harmful than good. So we beg to differ on that one, Adrian.
But also on that, you know, some people find people losing their temper really difficult. I do, partly because I grew up in a household where people did a lot of screaming and shouting. So I have a very strong reaction to that. And so I
wouldn't say do it every day, but it's, you know.
No, I personally don't think it's acceptable ever, really, because there's always another way to do it. Sorry, that's just what I feel.
Not always.
Okay,
Thanks.
do we have any other questions there before we move on to Liz, who's going to talk about emotional intelligence in the workplace?
Jesus Christ.
No? Okay then, Liz. Can everybody mute while Liz speaks to these next two slides, please?
Can't find the slides. Oh, God.
They're being shared for you, Adrian.
Well, I'm not getting a screen with anything coming up at the moment. I have to leave and come back in.
Okay, there's not much I can do about that. But what you have got is you've got oral. So Liz will be speaking to these slides and you'll be hearing her. So if people could mute now, that would be helpful. Thank you. Liz.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's lovely to be back with you. Before I talk to the slides, if it's okay, what we just talked about was really important. And I think Anne's comment in the chat about the sponge getting too full, I really like that, actually. I think I might have to pinch that, Anne. It starts dripping. And about drawing the line. And as I'm talking about the workplace anyway, a lot of what I do when I go in and work with people and one-to-one, it's probably the starting point. And a lot of the coaching is about that self-awareness. I always start with the person and about I find a strategy that really helps is the concept of urgent and important, and responsive and reactive, working responsively, and the opposite is reactively. I think I mentioned that when we talked about the workplace. And quite often, because neurodivergent people can be very empathetic and have high emotional intelligence and aware of other people's needs, they take on too much, they're sponges, and the whole sort of urgent thing is they become very reactive, and what they realize is, you know, when we have the discussion, is that they're actually, the urgent is dealing with other people's priorities, and then they don't address their own priorities or what is important in their core work. And so they're always putting themselves, their workload, their tasks, so second or third, and that's when they get overloaded behind. And also, I talk a lot about self-care and self-management. So this is all really resonating with me, Catherine. You know, it's nice to revisit it. I haven't thought about how gardener for a long time. And so, you know, self-care, you have to look after yourself. You have to be aware of, I use the analogy of a glass and it getting over full, and that tends to really help people. And knowing what triggers you, what makes your level rise and overflow. And so you have to maintain, being neurodivergent, you have to maintain a level where you function well. And that's about knowing your strengths and knowing that you're looking after yourself as well as other people's needs. So in terms of the slide, I mean, having a good working environment, it's not just about equipment, it's not, I mean, a large part of what makes a really good, positive, constructive working environment is somewhere where there's understanding, there's mutual respect, there's respect of difference, and the whole team, and where views, personalities, perceptions, they can all be exchanged, and it's about how you all contribute to that and how you find a place to express your way of doing things and appreciating other things, and also to recognize sometimes the difficulties are that there's a clash of, I mean, for want of a better word, kind of not learning stuff, but working styles, thinking styles. Someone who's very linear with someone who's very holistic and, you know, big idea thinking. Someone who, you know, likes the big ideas, and another one who goes straight to the detail. And so sometimes there's a clash of thinking styles, and seeing something from another person's perspective. So when I'm working with employees, is looking at, well, what position are you know, what's seeing things from, say, your line manager's point of view, or how does your line manager think? Is there a clash of thinking and processing of information, of dealing with work, and is that what is causing this kind of tension between you? So, and also about change, and that's why metacognition, I think Simon's going to talk about that, but it's so important as well. It's like looking ahead, preempting it, thinking, how am I going to deal with that? If change is coming up, the more you can prepare for it, the more you can adapt to it, and think and prepare your strategies or how you're going to take it on, can make you manage it so much more differently. Understanding flexibility is really important, and I think sometimes, I know with dyslexia and neurodivergent, you know, we might not like, you know, we know how we like things done, and sometimes adapting to change, it takes a time to learn new processes or procedures. So being able to be, in some ways we can be very flexible, but in kind of in the situations where perhaps we're not that confident, or, you know, managing your workload and task management, it can be a bit scary. But, you know, so flexibility is, you know, again, if you know in advance, you can put things into place and practice and rehearse and make the skills or the knowledge automatic, so you're not kind of thrown in at the deep end. And, you know, and also it's been aware of how the landscape can change. I mean, now the workplace, it's not like something, it changes all the time, and different practices, different IT systems come in. So it's about, I think, although you know, you like how you do things and you've got your strategies and they work, but a different role may require different strategies. So it's not like, you know, everything's wrong or nothing works or it's no good anymore. It's just different tasks, different roles, different circumstances. You might have to change floor or change building, will require looking at it in a different way and developing new strategies and systems to make it work. I mean, freedom to create, oh, we've moved to a different one, but freedom to create, I think it's really important in the workplace, and I talk about a lot with individuals, is to acknowledge, you know, really is acknowledge your strengths, but also with your line manager. Just as an example, I mean, I've had people where, you know, they've gone into certain industries which they've assumed to be creative or people-based, you know, people going into the public services, into the, you know, the police force or the fire service, thinking, oh, that's, you know, they're really going in with their sort of empathy skills, their people skills, their communication skills, and actually there's loads of admin. And it really sort of pulls the carpet out from under their feet. Or people who go into sort of the fashion industry. Ooh, isn't that something else? Think because it's creative and they've done art degrees, you know, and there's no creativity at all when you go in at certain levels. So it's really important to find out, like when we talked about the workplace, you know, what is the role you're going into? Are you going to be able to work to your strengths or not? You know, is it going to restrict you and cramp you, you know? But just recently I've been working with somebody, and she just realized, you know, her job had become so routine and she was doing the same kind of emails all the time. And actually she wasn't doing at all what she's good at. And so what we did, you know, we worked a bit with her line manager. She built the confidence, we practiced the line sort of thing. And she went to her line manager and said, I want to do some more drafting. I'm really good at drawing up, you know, I'm a big thinker. She was dyspraxic, she had big ideas. She wanted to get her teeth into something, not kind of routine, just so she was doing too much of the same thing that played to her weakness. So it's really important to be, you know, be able to work to your strengths, to have opportunities, you know. And some people, they come up with ideas and said to their manager, look, I'm getting a bit bored here. You might want to use a different word, but, you know, it's a bit one-dimensional. I've got these really good strengths and I don't utilize them in my role at all. So it might be something, they've come to a negotiation because it's not their main role, but some people have gone and they've done something, you know, it's usually people-based, either setting up some group or, you know, looking after the workforce or something, you know, and they set up something or go in and doing some projects, usually, you know, and they say, look, just give me a project, give me something where I can express my creativity or, you know, put my skills and strengths, make it more interesting and dynamic for me. So I would say, you know, don't be afraid of doing that, sharing your ideas with your manager and trying to manage your role to suit you better. And it's bringing people with you. So it is about explaining to others and also, you know, that empathy, seeing things from their point of view. So if we go on to the next slide, I wanted to talk a bit about positioning as well, because I think that's really, really interesting. So, you know, when we go into the workplace, you know, there's a whole number of people that are there, and you've got your kind of organisation. I think, is that who you mean by the leader, Catherine, or the directors? You've got your direct sort of line manager, and you've got your colleagues, and all of these, and there's all different dynamics with all of them. And the dynamics are really important. And I would say changing the dynamics is a really is an important approach, I think, and I do encourage people I work with to try and do that. And it can start off with the one-to-one, A, insisting that you have it, and B, taking the lead. Tell people, show them how you need to work. So like saying, I'll draw up the agenda. You know, and within that, you start off with a point. This is what I've achieved. These are my priorities. Rubber stamp it for me. You know, bring to the meeting. I want to, you know, this is, we structure the meeting, the one-to-one. I get them to develop a template, make it positive. And I say, what do you want from your line manager? How can they help you best? Negotiate. I use the word loosely. I've been using it a lot this year. Manipulate. I think the word manipulate isn't necessarily negative. I would say it's about, because people always get it when I say it, but it's about negotiating, managing the situation in the best possible way to make it work for you. So even like doing group work, I say it to the students at university, you know, take the lead. Give people roles, put yourself in the right role, you know, with team meetings. I'll be the chair. If you're the chair, you can break it down, you can have breaks, you can sum up at the end of each section, make it work for you, pause in between each bit, allocate a note taker. Yeah, so if you change a dynamic and make it work for you, it can really be empowering, and it changes those, it can change those dynamics, and that kind of drip slowly, you know, with your colleagues. You can share ideas. I mean, just things like I've been working with a teacher for many years, and you know, it's like reminding it, you can delegate. Delegate work. Don't hold onto everything. Don't carry the load. And that can be really, you know, really helpful. Just have a look at, and it's about, you know, that word reframing, you know, it's commonplace in this field, but it's so important. And negative relationships can be turned around. But again, that empathy, sometimes, particularly with relationships that can be, you know, we have to acknowledge the reality of the situation. And in some workplaces, it can be quite toxic. And, you know, it's like, well, you've got to see it from both points of view. Your manager's really stressed here, or they're carrying a lot of the load. They've lost confidence in you. How are we going to build up their confidence again? What do you need to do to build up their confidence? And we have to be, you know, honest about the situation. And then sometimes just seeing it from their perspective, or, you know, they're micromanaging, let's acknowledge it. They've got, you know, they're watching everything you do. They're checking everything off. How can we manage that? How can we get them to back off? What do you need to do to establish that confidence in the relationship again? And that trust is obviously very important. And obviously me as the go-between, I need to talk to the line manager as well to kind of back off and give you that space to build confidence. But changing that dynamic, particularly with the one-to-one and saying team meetings, is taking yourself out of the firing line as well. So, you know, if you lead, then you're not kind of passively sitting there and taking the let me think of a delicate word, taking the negative things. If you lead, then you set the agenda more, you set the framework, you set the terms of negotiation. And it might be something to consider, you know, have that discussion about neurodivergence. I worked with someone who's very interesting, I thought she was incredibly brave, and she worked in a really high-flying field in law. And she would just, as soon as and there was a lot of turnaround, and you had to move between chambers and different, you know, companies and that. And she would, the first day, she would like, I want a meeting, I want to talk, here's my, you know, I want to talk about my dyslexia, I want my reasonable adjustments in place, I want to meet the team. And she would talk with the team and explain it. She would prepare a handout, she would talk to the handout and explain things. And things like, it's important to explain, say, your technology, your strategies, because when people, that's the thing though, you know, disclosure, we've talked about disclosure, and it's totally down to an individual, it's individual choice. But if you don't explain, other people will fill the gaps and interpret. That's my issue, and I'm not saying it's easy at all. But so, like, for example, in some workplaces, people wearing their noise cancelling headphones, they're saying, oh, I don't like how she's removing herself from the team, and she's not working as a team member or going off to work in another room. So you're unapproachable. So it's like, no, you know, telling people this is why I do it this way. I'm not being unapproachable. But, you know, so if you feel that, then you can say, well, please, if you've got a question or make an appointment to meet you, I'll make sure I'm available and I'm not in the middle of a report where I need to concentrate. Then you can kind of get that interpersonal kind of communication going on. And you can, you know, so, and then you can negotiate and say, well, okay, if this is your needs, you know, if you need me to be visibly part of the team, then how can we do it so my needs are met as well as yours? So I think I'll stop now, otherwise but
Right,
I just, okay, sorry, did I talk too much? Sorry.
Are there any questions? Are there any questions for Liz about her take on the workplace in terms of dynamics and how we interact with each other?
I put up a comment which was relaying what someone I work with said, which I thought was most interesting. Worked in these two different countries, and I'm afraid, you know, England comes out very, very badly on that. And that culture of mistrust is, you know, disbelief is very strong there. It's really not good enough and not acceptable. I mean, you know, people should just assume that somebody's lying or fraudulent unless they prove it otherwise, and you get it even more with the benefit system and other things. And this person had worked in care and fields like that. So, you know, she was in a very good position to compare the two. And, you know, it has to change. If it doesn't change, they just go around Groundhog Day in circles, you know, and ultimately people have to start to think, well, okay, why should somebody kind of make it up and lie? That has to change.
Okay, good point, Adrian, about the trust issue. Anybody else got an observation or comment or question? Okay then. Would you like to go into breakout rooms now, or would you prefer to carry on with the presentation? What would you like? Because if you go
Breakout for me.
If you go into breakout rooms, which will be for about 10 minutes, it'll be about line managers I have known and their styles of engagement, and how has emotional intelligence been applied to the situation by you or that line manager? So would you like to do that?
I'd like
Not
to do
sure.
breakout rooms.
Dee, what did you say?
I'd like to do breakout rooms.
Okay.
If everybody else is interested.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the share now. Then have you got what you're meant to be discussing?
No.
Can it be written in the chat, or please? Because I can't.
Yeah.
I can't.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Liz
Oh,
is going to put it in the chat. The main thing to remember is about your experience of line managers, how you might have actually applied emotional intelligence to a situation, or how they might have, because, you know, there are some great line managers out there. So I'm just going to stop sharing now. Okay. And we've got 14 people. So I'm going to add a room, and I'm going to have a go this time at automatically assigning the rooms. I just want to see how that works, if that's okay with everybody. It's 10 minutes. You can always get out of the room. I shall be in the main room. So you can come and talk to me if you want. or you can stay in your rooms. So we've got 14 people, 13 people. So I would say there's about 3 or 4 in each room. So are you okay with this? I am going to try and do this automatically now. The reason for it actually is I've got a big seminar next week and I've got 60 people I'm going to have to put in breakout rooms. So I'd rather try and do it automatically. So I'm just testing how that works. If it doesn't work, you'll soon tell me, I'm sure. Okay, then, here we go. Oh no, didn't work. Okay, so we're going to go back. And I'm going to assign. Okay, you've all been assigned. There's 4 people in each room. Yeah, here we go. Hi, Liz. You're right.
Yeah, me and Lois were in the same room, but the other 2, there was Adrian and someone called Cushy, but we couldn't hear anything and they weren't responding. I don't know if there's a problem with the room. I did try chat as well and Cushy didn't get back to me. I don't know who she is.
Shall we close the rooms then? I mean, I have got Frank saying to me unable to join a breakout. I haven't.
Yeah, I wonder, can you send a message to the rooms? I don't know if you're able to do that and say, are they working okay? I imagine people would have said something by now, but where's Lois gone? Has she logged out a meeting?
We're admitting Lois. I've just sent a message.
I managed to sign myself out of the meeting altogether.
I thought that's maybe what happened.
So I've only just got back in. So, but neither Adrian nor Cushy, whoever that is.
Well, what's happened to that?
I don't know. We tried several times, didn't we, Liz? And they just didn't seem to. And I don't know who Kushi, I know who Adrian is, obviously, but I don't know who Kushi is. I don't know if she's the person who.
I'm moving them.
Okay.
I'm moving them to the other rooms,
Okay.
so they're not on our own.
Yeah, well, it just didn't seem to connect with them at all, because we did.
Adrian's just asked to be admitted into the main room. Are you ready for this?
Okay. Yeah.
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 Well, I mean, I haven't heard anything from anybody to say that, and nobody's asked to come back into the main room.
They must be working okay. Adrian, did you hear us in the breakout room? Because we were trying to talk to you, but nothing was happening.
It's not happening now either, is it?
No.
Maybe he's lost the connection.
I think Adrian's got a bad connection anyway.
Yeah.
In terms of technology.
And do you know who Kushi is? I was wondering if she was the person. No.
I don't recognise her name.
Ipsala.
Sorry?
Her name is Ipsala.
No. I was wondering, you know, the person I talked to this week, and she was very keen to join in today, but she hasn't joined in, so there you go. I had quite a long chat with her, and she's going through all sorts of things, and she really wanted to be
you've
part
got
of it.
access to the chat, haven't you, when you're in the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I sent in the chat. I didn't get any response.
My chat's gone completely dead.
I mean, I've got chat here, but nobody's actually coming back on the chat. So.
Well,
anyway,
how can I move?
Is that Adrian there? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. We've been having problems connecting with you. Now you've gone mute again.
Well, we'll know, won't we, when they come back?
Yeah, it has actually, Liz, before we talk about the session, I keep admiring your yellow walls. Is that your new decoration?
Yeah. You should
That's
see the main feature wall.
I love sunshiny. It's lovely. This is your study room, is it?
I love it.
Your study room is all sunshiny. How lovely. That's really nice. Anyway, it's been, I think it's been really interesting so far. It's just such an important thing, isn't it? Which people often overlook.
I think it's vital, you know. I think it's one of the key things that needs to be addressed and discussed.
I think that, you know, many dyslexic neurodivergent people don't realise just how much of a skill they've got there, because actually they've had to deal with so many challenging situations. It has developed as a key skill.
No, I completely agree with you there. I think that's amazing, but yeah. But I suppose also, you know, the other side of that is that
I mean, to be blunt, I found the labels a kiss of death. And I was quoted
and the label was a kiss of death.
Yeah, and there was a quote in the National Autistic Society report. Then I realised that actually the anonymous person being quoted was me. It was that bad. So, you know.
So what label do you feel is the kiss of death? Adrian?
Well, I mean, especially autism, Asperger's. There's this, you know, they think they're dealing with some kind of, you know, I don't know, like kind of screaming kid that bangs their head, or some kind of weird stereotypes. And then there was the kind of rollback of all the reasonable adjustments, you know. So I mean, prior to that, interviews, jobs, afterwards, kiss of death.
Okay, we've got 1 more minute left, and nobody's asked to be admitted back, so I think it must be going all right in the other 2 rooms.
Well, you might tell them. You might need to tell them that it's time to come back now. Perhaps they don't realise.
Well, they get told. You get told. Actually, there's an automatic message that goes out.
All right.
And I have just broadcasted to them that it's will be soon time to come back. And what happens is that I then close all the rooms and everybody comes back. And hopefully we find people have been engaged in a conversation.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I think that they would have asked to be admitted back otherwise, as you did, you know.
Yeah.
No idea what happened there. So
no, I think it's true what you were saying there, Catherine. A lot of people aren't aware of, unless they've done work on themselves, they're very confident. They're not aware of their emotional intelligence or the importance of it and how to use it. And it's something that can be managed and used. And so, you know, they're not aware of their own strength, really.
Yes, it's incredibly important, you know. It is a huge strength to have.
And just builds a resilience. It's like your buffer, you know, it builds up your resilience without being draining. It's a different kind of resilience rather than that kind of flogging yourself to death. It's about that inner strength of and also I think it's just about acknowledging, you know, that you're okay.
Okay, everybody, could you all unmute? We had one room where people couldn't hear, so they were asking to be admitted in, but we thought that you must be all right in your rooms because otherwise you'd have been asked to be admitted back to the main room. Is that right?
Yeah, we were good.
Okay. Oh, that's really good to know. Does anybody want to feed back on line managers I have known? Anne?
Well, they're brilliant, from brilliant to awful, you know, and, you know, totally unnegotiable with, you know, and there's a full range.
Well, what we were doing in the rooms, what we were actually doing was looking at emotional intelligence and how emotional intelligence was applied to a situation with a line manager, yourself or the line manager. Has anybody got any feedback on that?
We sort of answered the questions a bit different, but Simon came in at the end to rescue us a little bit from where we were in talking about how Adrian just spoken, and then we went to, it was very at the end. So I don't know, Simon, do you think we could feed back on that? What do you think?
I suppose I was just talking about my most recent line manager, who I felt very confident in being able to discuss my dyslexia. So I suppose that was kind of, I think, an example of me identifying the emotional intelligence of my line manager. And I said that I'd had previous line managers where I certainly wouldn't have wanted to discuss my dyslexia. Yeah. It was just sort of, I suppose, identifying their emotional intelligence in that manager.
Yeah, exactly. We just felt sometimes some people you just felt, and you kind of know it from their actions and other things, that they wouldn't be able to support you, and you rather not share that information with that person, Frankie, even though you might be suffering in silence, which is really an odd thing. But you'd rather suffer in silence that you don't think that person can take care, and not that you're really want to nurture you, but take care of the information you're giving you, because you're vulnerable and it's a part of you that's delicate, and all the other traumas that you might have had in your inner self in other ways, you don't want to bring it, and this person's just going to wreck it for you when you're already trying to build yourself. I think for me, I've had some really supportive managers where you feel nurtured and understood in a way that you do your best, because they're empowering and champion. And Jennifer, who is in our group, we talked about, we both resonated with that, when you had somebody who you got that sense that they believed in you, which sounds really, so it goes back to that kind of inner self when you want that belief. So that was really interesting, that we had similar kind of understanding of that and feeling when we connected with people who understand you. It makes you be your best and know you can, instead of suffering in silence, which I have done, because people can be really horrible and they don't have that connection. It's all about self. So that where I've always had to, and I think what Jennifer was talking, where you've had to think about other people, if you're going to make a mistake, you have to ask somebody, you really think about other people's feelings, and you're sensitive and all those kind of things. So those are where we were going with some of our discussion in our meeting, and why some of that, we've developed some of that intelligence as well, because we're in tune about feelings, because we've had to always think about how we're feeling about a situation, if that makes sense.
No, it makes complete sense. And you're in a way, you're talking about intuition too. Intuitive feelings that we have about how that person might react. Anybody else?
It's different layers. It's on different layers and different skills, but it is, yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I've got a pet name for nasty neurotypicalist line managers. I call them neurohostiles.
Oh, good one, Adrian, actually. Yeah.
And with some of these people, well, they could have something staring in the face, and they couldn't give a damn, that they're not interested in the truth, they just want you out of there.
Yeah. Has anybody got any good experiences that they can talk about?
Yeah, I've had some really good ones as well, but and it can be within the same organization.
Yeah.
But for some of them, you, especially just after you've been diagnosed with everything, you're a problem they wish they hadn't been landed with. And really kind of any excuse to have a go at you.
Do people find that the ethos filters down from the top? Have you found that in the way people behave towards each other in an organization?
Not in a huge organization like the DWP. I mean, I had a very long supportive letter from the number 2 in the whole department, who I happen to know because I was working on the overall disability thing with him, so I knew him personally. Made absolutely no difference. They can't. His title is second permanent secretary.
Has anybody else got any views? Jennifer? Or Dee?
I was on mute, I think. Yeah, so I was saying to Marcia in our group, which was about a supportive manager who was very keen sort of to push me outside of my comfort zone. So, but in a positive way. So to lead on a presentation or to lead on a project, knowing that they would be there to support me if I wasn't sure, if I had a question. And I think they were very good at reading me. If I was very nervous, they'd be like, oh, don't worry, or what you're worried about. So I could tell that they could read me quite well, which was quite reassuring, because they knew when to step in and support me. So that was quite a positive experience for me.
That sounds good, yeah. Frank, Stan Zillis, Frank, would you like to say something? Because you've been doing quite a lot of negotiation in the workplace recently. Hi there. Do you want
Marcia, did you say that Stan, I don't think he can...
No, they can't speak at the moment. Yeah, sorry.
Because he was in our group.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Does anybody else want to say anything before we go back to the presentation then?
I think our group, we were talking again about being intuitive and almost having a sixth sense, sensing people's feelings and how best to approach or not approach. We talked about sort of continually knocking on the door and it doesn't open, and how that makes you feel. Do you keep going? Just keeping it balanced so you can do your day-to-day work.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, to keep it balanced. Yeah, and to be resilient and just to keep on going. Yeah, and have those strategies in place. Oh, that's great. Thank you ever so much, everybody. We're going to start sharing again now. Thank you. Right. Okay. Going to come on to part 2, and this is where Simon will be coming in a minute. And this is the point that we're making. Actually, we're saying that intelligence, emotional intelligence, is incredibly important. We've all actually evidenced that in our conversations and about the positive nature of it. And my next point is that actually it brings economic benefit. And if neurodivergent people are fairly high on emotional intelligence, then surely they bring economic benefit to society. I'm going to try doing a film of Daniel Goleman, if that's all right with everybody. Are you happy for me to do that? Can you see this? Can you see what I'm doing? You're not still on the presentation. You can see what I'm doing, yeah?
Catherine, it's still on the presentation.
What I'd like to do is share with you.
Can you see this?
Oh, yeah. It's not changed yet. I can hear it.
It's this skill set particularly, which is going to help along the way. And by emotional intelligence, I simply mean how we handle ourselves, manage our.
Okay, let's stop the share and then we'll go back. We'll get there in the end. Can you see what I'm doing? Can you see this?
Yep.
Great.
Start to change, yeah. Yeah, I can see you now.
Okay. Can you see the widescreen?
What I'd like to do is share with you how emotional intelligence helps us be better betas, and why it's this skill set particularly, which is going to help along the way. And by emotional intelligence, I simply mean how we handle ourselves, manage ourselves, lead ourselves, and how we handle our relationships. And I'll go into it in more detail. Interestingly, I spent yesterday morning with one of the big 4 banks here in Australia, the CEO, his direct reports, and his high potentials, the people that they saw as next generation for top leadership there. And they wanted to learn about emotional intelligence and leadership. The reason was that not only are each of those executives trying to improve themselves along these lines, but they see that by doing it together, they can bring the whole organization along. And by doing that, they can grow their business. It's actually a strategic decision. There are 2 kinds of strategy, you know. One is exploitation and one is exploration. Exploitation was embodied by the co-CEOs of BlackBerry. Anybody here have a BlackBerry? Exactly my point. So they had a wonderful product for a long time. They were the first in the smartphone area. And in that space, they captured the market until something else started to happen. Smartphones were developed by Apple, by Samsung, and they didn't see it coming. They just kept developing their keyboard. In fact, in 2007, there was a small squib in what was in the major news magazine in America, Time magazine. It said, you know, there's a new word in the English language. The word is pizzled. It stands for puzzled and pissed off. And it's how you feel when someone takes out their BlackBerry and starts talking to someone else. Things have changed. The norms for attention changed. Now we don't feel pizzled, but also you can tell it was 10 years ago because they said BlackBerry instead of iPhone. So the other strategic approach is exploration. That's what Steve Jobs was brilliant at. It's looking at the next new thing, innovating, being able to be there before your competitors. So emotional intelligence may seem counterintuitive, but I'm going to argue that it's what makes us better betas. I first started to realize the importance of emotional intelligence years ago when I went to college. I grew up in a farm town in the Central Valley of California. And actually, the outskirts of Perth reminded me of where I grew up. But this town was not distinguished in any way, but I managed to get into the most competitive college in America because they wanted to diversify. They wanted a kid who was from a public school instead of an elite prep school and from somewhere else. In those days, that was considered diversification. So I found myself at this fancy college and met a guy who had perfect scores on every college entrance exam. This guy was brilliant, high IQ, but he had a problem. The problem was he couldn't get up in the morning on time, never got to class, never finished his papers. Took him 8 years to get his bachelor's degree. So he was brilliant on the IQ side. He was lacking in terms of how he managed himself. Some years later, I went to my 20th high school reunion, and I met someone there who was the most successful person in our class at that time. And I had known him pretty well in high school. He was someone who was really not a good student. He was so-so, like an average, very average student. But he was a fantastic human being. He was the kind of person who you enjoyed doing things with, who really listened, who was very gracious, put you at your ease, you had fun with him. 20 years later, he was the senior vice president of a company that then was the hottest company going, the hottest sector going was cable television. Then at the 40th reunion, I got the rest of the story. This guy had left that company, started his own company, became CEO, sold it at the peak of the market, and did something that from the point of view of all the people who lived in my hometown was a mark of success. And that was that he lived on a golf course in Florida. So he had a lot of emotional intelligence.
Okay. I could listen to him actually all day, but we need to kind of get on. I thought that was fascinating. He talks about strategies, exploitation and exploration. So, you know, what he has to say is seeped in not only sociology and justice and a certain amount of politics, but also, you know, he's looking at the psychology of the thing, which is emotional intelligence. Right, we're going to go back to the share of the, what did you think about that, by the way? What did you think about that talk from Daniel Goleman?
I can't sort of, I'm still processing it, but what I picked up, sorry, let me put my screen on. What I picked up, I always talk about dyslexia and the cultural perspective, and I know some of my cultural and the social community aspects of my upbringing has an impact on the things that I do and those kind of structures. You know, my mum was very strict on house cleaning, so it helped me to develop order and the kind of like mindfulness about things. So I feel your environment and the things that you're exposed to can have an impact on the way you do things. And I don't know, I'm still processing it, but I did hear him when I listened to it again, but I don't know if you can pick up what I'm saying. Yes, in terms of when he was talking about coming from the country and being from a farmer, all those kind of things, I can resonate with that from a cultural perspective in my, you know, so that's, I'm just throwing that in there, but I don't know if you get what I mean.
I do get what you mean, but he's talking about diversification and the fact that he was brought into a college for that community to be more diverse. He was thrown in with these people who had an IQ, but it was not only a very specific IQ. And he clearly came in with a different type of intelligence, didn't he? For him to be able to see what else and observe what else was going on, in terms of the way people were managing themselves and actually not managing very well, but their IQ was actually very high.
But so I was trying to say that I can see that in different aspects. I'll take an example, like being a mature student when I went to university, to comparison to the younger students. I had a different perspective and mindset to the way I did things. So I'm just trying to, but I don't know if you can get what I mean. So that's what I'm adding to it. I can see what he's saying from different aspects of my own lived experience, if that makes sense.
Talking about the product, we are products of our environment, aren't we? As well?
Yeah, thank you for understanding.
Okay, we're going to go back to the share now, if that's all right. Can you see this? You can, great. Okay. So we've already talked about the economic benefit. And we've actually talked about the fact that neurodivergent people, dyslexic people who have the ability to think multidimensionally, have the ability to make links. And you heard Daniel Goleman talk about technology and Steve Jobs. And these are people who in the world of technology, for instance, can make links and innovate idea making. So my point is this, that if neurodivergent people contribute so much to society, and it's already been evidenced over decades actually, why are our assessment procedures and ways of examining and assessing people so very, very rigid in order to not enable a huge percentage of the population to thrive and develop? The world is actually much more complex than that. And as we've already said, the world is made up of multiple intelligences. It's not just one fit for all. And therefore it requires people to actually work at multiple levels because, we all work differently. So changes to systems are required. We know that, we've all been saying that. Changes to testing and assessment are required because the economic benefit is for everybody in society, and therefore it will, if education is changed and revised in the way they actually assess, it will embrace the neurodivergent thinker much more to contribute to our society. There was a very interesting report that came out of the Sir John Cass Business School a few years ago in 2012 by Halfpenny and Halfpenny. And they interviewed a huge sample of business people. And they found that 1 in 4 of those business people were actually neurodivergent, dyslexic entrepreneurs. So thus they create more jobs than non-dyslexics actually. And the report called for more investment for talents and neurodivergent. Could somebody please turn that microphone off?
Yeah, but I'm on mute.
Yeah,
I'll be on this.
It's Andrew Kenny, I think it is.
I'll have it when I come out from this.
It's Andrew Kenny. If you can,
I didn't know if you wanted to well, I suppose I could, but
can you mute her?
Okay. Well, I kind of want to hear what they're saying. I want to hear what they're saying. I can't hear them.
Okay. So the point I'm making is that there is a huge number of entrepreneurs and business people out there who are dyslexic and neurodivergent. Very interestingly, I did an actual a poll of MPs. It was a couple of years ago, and high percentage of Conservatives, Tory MPs are dyslexic, far more than Labour.
Must have done something to it, have we? whatever you want, gorgeous. You must be fabulous. Do you want to press that again? I don't want to go on.
So it'd be really helpful. Thank you. Okay, right. Okay, we're over to you, Simon. You just let me know when you want to go on to the next slide.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you very much for sort of giving me this opportunity. I'd sort of just like to point out that this was kind of an invitation by Catherine, just from a sort of comment I made last week. And I'd like to sort of say that you know, whereas Liz and Catherine are professionals in this area, I'd like to emphasise that I'm not a professional in this area, but it's something that interests me. And I suppose this is kind of like a student's contribution. So I'm going to try and sort of explain what I understand about the concept of the term executive functions. And I suppose I also hope this doesn't become confusing in the sense we've been presented with quite a lot of information tonight. But anyway, I guess I just want to say I've done a bit of, I did a sort of a coaching course with a company called Connections in Mind earlier in the year, and it was specifically actually about working with my, it was a sort of parenting course, and becoming aware of our executive functions to be able to kind of help in this case my son, who's dyslexic, ADHD and high functioning ASD, be able to kind of, he's 11 now, to be able to sort of I suppose, yeah, to be able to see how he's reacting to certain situations, how to be able to manage that, and also to help him manage the way he responds to the environment, and etc. I said I'd just sort of say what I knew about executive functions, and I'll try and do that as quickly as possible. And what I understand is that they are a sort of a set of mental skills that we use to help plan, organize our responses. And I think an awareness of these sort of functions can help, well, we all use them, but I think an understanding can really benefit people with ADHD, ASD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc. And actually, have the next slide, Catherine. And we use these executive functions to help us to focus attention, make plans, remember instructions, keeping track of time, staying on task, being flexible when things change, and controlling our impulses. So next slide. Executive functions, as a way of maybe understanding it, is executive functions have been described as sort of like the air traffic control centers of our brains. Most of these executive functions have been sort of are taking place in the prefrontal cortex of the brain, which is the bit, you know, sort of at the front above our eyes. And I think that actually I just want to say something here. If I don't know, another thing I found very interesting in my understanding my dyslexia is sort of, I don't know if anyone else has come across the triune brain and the idea of the reptilian, the mammalian, and then the sort of higher functioning brain. And I found that the understanding of that in a way of thinking or thinking about thinking or using my brain really helpful. And there's kind of like this concept that when we're using our executive functions, we're using our higher brain, and when we're not using our executive functions, when you're stressed or tired or hungry or thirsty or angry, you're not using your higher brain and you're in your lower brain. So next slide, please, Catherine. And I suppose I've just done this slide in a way to sort of to help me understand the sense that when we say these executive functions are in your sort of prefrontal cortex, this is a sort of rather like Catherine's been describing emotional intelligence. This is kind of a theoretical framework for understanding those processes. And it's not as if these functions are actually sort of in here. It's a theory to understand those sort of processes. Next slide, Catherine. And I'm doing a bit of research this week into executive functions just to brush up. And again, actually, thank you, Catherine, for asking me to do this, because I think it's really helped me. Although I did this sort of short course at the beginning of the year, being actually sort of having the challenge of trying to explain something that you've been taught is a really good way to sort of see if you can understand it. And when I was just looking back at just doing a bit of research back, that there was lots of sort of sources that had sort of different numbers of executive functions, from 3 up to about 12. I referred to the coaching team that I worked with, and they came up with these 11. So I'm just going to get another slide, which so the sort of 11 executive functions that I came across include working memory, which is, as we probably most know, is that ability to hold and use information. I just check emotional control, so that's directing appropriate behaviors, and then metacognition, which, as Liz mentioned last week, is that ability to sort of step back and sort of self-monitor and self-evaluate you in that situation. Response inhibition, which is thinking before you act. Organization, I think Marcia actually, talking earlier about, being taught how to, was brought up, with a very sort of way of, looking after the household. That sort of like having the sort of a good way of developing that sort of executive function for organization, having sort of a systematic approach. Then planning and prioritization, which is, being able to plan and prioritize tasks. Cognitive flexibility, flexible thinking, which in a way, I suppose, has also been described as sort of thinking out of a box, which actually is that sort of classic trait that a lot of dyslexics identify with. Then we have task initiation, getting started, goal-directed persistence, persevering on a task to completion, time management, estimating and using time effectively. And then finally, sustained attention, staying on a task despite distractibility or lack of interest. I think that's the last slide, is it, Catherine?
That's the last slide of your section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
how,
I mean,
how you found that? Because
how have I found it?
carry on. You carry on what you're saying.
So I mean, I suppose I'm. It's nice to sort of be able to reflect on these, and I suppose I wanted to just discuss it is because I think in a way I know quite little of this, but I think there's something really interesting that I would like to obviously understand more about this, and especially when I go back to what I understood about the triune brain, in that about making sure you're in your higher brain when you're trying to do these sort of complex things, and recognizing when you're not in your higher brain that you're in your lower brain, when you're seeing red, to sort of as we said earlier, about taking a step back and trying to either take that rest or that break, so that when you're in the workplace, you are able to sort of step back and be in that higher brain. So I'll stop there. If that.
Well, thank you. That made complete sense, and you're an absolute professional. Thank you, Simon. I think a lot of what you said resonated with what we were saying earlier. In some ways, this is just different words for almost the same thing, because you talk about emotional control, metacognition, response inhibition. This is all about self-regulation, isn't it? And the ability, in order to self-regulate, the ability to plan, time manage, goal-directed persistence. Have you, are you finding that you're doing this after having taken this course? Are you finding that you're able to be more effective in doing this, or do you find that it's practice?
I think I've got to do more practice. I think, and this is why it was very nice to have this invitation to sort of revisit it in a way. I mean, I think in the basic sense for me, and working with my, with my partner, and with working with my son, I think that the main thing is sort of understanding both when we're, not in our, maybe in our lower brain, when my son, flips his lid and says something and you just see red. It's being able to recognize that both in yourself and in him. So I think that's what's really helped, is to realize is that when he says something and you see red and you want to say something back, but just to sort of stop yourself and I just sort of take myself away from the situation for a moment and then try and address the issue.
Is your son sort of reframing how he does things? I mean,
no, not at the moment. No. He's 11, and I think they do say that a sort of an ADHD brain is usually about 2 or 3 years younger in maturity. So, at the moment, no, I don't think so. Maybe sometimes, but I'd say most of the time, no. But I'm just hoping that we can go through this again, and it'll be something that he'll be able to use going forward.
I'm sure actually, as you and your partner do this more and more, he will actually, pick this up from you, learn behaviour. So just by you doing this, he will learn, won't he?
Yeah.
Has anybody got any questions for Simon at all?
What was goal-directed persistence again? It's the.
So goal-directed persistence is persevering on a task to completion. I mean, I think some of these actually kind of overlap a bit, and I mean they are obviously all interconnected. And as I said, when I was doing my research, I came across some information saying that there are 3 executive functions. And they were, sorry, I've got my notes here. Were working memory, inhibition control, and cognitive flexibility. So, I mean, I don't know. I suppose metacognition, I guess, isn't there. So, yeah, I think there is more than 3. But there is obviously, you can sort of say that there are. I mean, in some ways, I was wondering, organization, that kind of goes with planning and prioritization. So yeah. But anyway, I just went with the list that I was kind of I'd been given.
That's great. Anybody else got any other comments?
Thanks, Simon.
Yeah, It was really good, Simon. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Simon.
Yeah, and
Thank
also
you.
it was a very interesting process that myself and Simon went through, you know, because we were integrating his slides into the presentation for emotional intelligence. So that was actually a really interesting process in itself, actually, and I learned a lot.
Yeah, I wanted to
so
say
thank you very much, Simon.
Yeah, I just want to say one point, Simon. I think it's helped me to be a bit more reflective, being neurodivergent myself and having a child who's neurodivergent. It's really working that out on which is my stuff and what's my child's stuff, and how I can, you know, level it out to have some reasonable understanding and not be mad. So I really think I'm going to look at this again. I remember hearing about executive, but I've never looked at it in this way. And you've broken it down really. It's helpful to me. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. We're going on to the next slide. We're going towards the end. There's only 2 more slides now, and then we'll be done. So just to recap, we're celebrating neurodivergent dyslexic cognitive thinking and strategies. We're saying there's lots and lots of strengths in our cognitive thinking. In general, there's a culture of emotional resilience, and it's something that Simon just talked about, that goal persistence, that persistence towards a goal. My goodness, yes, we're quite good at that. Receptive to our environment and able to make sense of the surroundings. We do that as observers. You know, there's a sense of being outside, but being observant of what's going on in order to understand the meaning around us. And don't forget, we are inner and outer environments. Our cognitive thinking is our inner environment, our outer environment is our relationships that we make. And that actually informs our cognitive thinking. We are not an island. We're not on our own. We are part of humanity, even though at times we stand outside of that and we are great observers, analytical observers of life. Okay. We tend to utilize technology across a wide range of media. There's this ability to go across discipline and make complex connections, and ability to transact the meaning from occurring situations because of our ability to observe. This comes straight out of my research, by the way, after having interviewed many, many dyslexic people and non-dyslexic people. And finally, and I like this, Efland, educational psychologist. Reality is a construct of perceptions and knowledge. This is so true. One person's perception is another person's completely different perception and different take on what's happened and what's going on around us. Therefore, a person is guided by personal effort. My goodness, we have personal effort, interest and experience, including the social and cultural context in which that person will acquire new knowledge. And that's what we're doing today. And that's what we're doing in the Next Step course. We're part of this community, we're part of a culture, and we're acquiring new knowledge by sharing information between us. It's just not myself, Marcia and Liz and Lois who are talking, it's you who are talking as well. And we are learning from each other. And another point I want to make is that the reason for the Next Step, the whole reason for it, is to provide that forum for neurodivergent debate and communication, because when we get together as a neurodivergent community and dyslexic community, we get it. We understand what we're talking about. We get it very, very quickly. And so having that shared knowledge and shared experience is so important to our cultural value and our own position and confidence within society. And that is why I have been so persistent in saying that the next step is just for neurodivergent people and dyslexic people, because there is so little out there for us as adults. And that is why this is a shared community forum for all of us. Okay. And I just wanted to finish on that note. The next part 3, is next week. And I really, really hope that people bring some of their experiences to the competencies of being emotionally intelligent. So we would love to get some case stories out of you where you talk, as Simon did, about your experiences within the workplace, within life, within education, wherever, of how you handled emotional intelligence, or how you saw others be emotionally intelligent within that environment. And these are the areas for which we hope you'll have a narrative. It could be one of those areas, it could be all of those areas. This isn't homework. You can just come and just talk and have a voice, but we want to hear you, okay, next week, because that is the third part of this session. It's about over to you. I'm going to stop sharing now and go back to the gallery. Does that sound all right to everybody? Yeah? Okay, very nice to see you with us, Andre. I know that you haven't been well. Andre has been unwell, and so it's very nice to see her with us tonight. So I think we might stop there. We've got some nice stuff in the chat saying, fantastic, really enjoyed this evening. Lots of thanks to Simon. And thank you, Stan Zillis, for you having your thumb up. So unless anybody's got anything they would like to say at this moment, we will probably say goodbye until next week. But very many thanks to Simon and Liz and to all of you for your contributions. Anybody want to say anything finally? Okay, then. We're going to say goodbye. And thank you, Simon.
Thank you. See you next
Thank
week.
you, Catherine.
Take care.
Thank you, Liz.
Bye.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Catherine.
Nadia.
Catherine.
Everybody else.